This could genuinely have killed me, and many others. Now, I know that makes me sound like a drama llama, but it's absolutely true. Statistics show there are thousands of fatalities on the roads every year, and whilst a lot of them are attributed to driver error, many of them are also attributed to vehicle defects, and many of those might be latent defects. More about that in a minute, it's very important. So here's my story. Well, my first mistake recently going to China was taking the car to park before I flew. Because obviously, as you've guessed, there's a problem with the car, so I had a whole faff getting home. More about that again in a minute. My biggest mistake over all of that was buying a Land Rover. I know, everyone will tell me that they are not reliable, and I've experienced that firsthand. Lessons learned, I won't be doing that again, but it did give me the opportunity to do this video for you to show you just how dangerous this can be. So what was the fault? Well, the fault was the steering rack, i.e. the power steering. The power steering completely failed. Now, had this happened whilst changing lanes on the motorway or winding down a windy road at national speed limit or anything else, believe me when I tell you how heavy it was to get it out of the car park to get recovered, it just simply would not have been possible to steer the car on one of these windy roads or high-speed motorways or whatever. That could well have resulted in a fatal collision and obviously involved many other vehicles. Now, what do we do about this? Because the vehicle is nowhere near end of life. It's probably about halfway through its life. I think it's got about 60,000 miles on the clock. Now, for a diesel Land Rover, you'd expect it to do at least double that. So it's at most halfway through its life. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about other situations that have been upheld in the consumer favor and what you might do about this. But this really then brings to mind a real bugbear of mine, both as an individual citizen and as a lawyer, because obviously I deal with all sorts of different companies in my practice. And when I say that I do consumer law, some people usually think kettles and microwaves, but obviously consumer law applies to any purchase you do, no matter how big, as a consumer. So obviously except property, there's separate rules relating to property, but more about that in other videos. But let's say you buy a vehicle for £80,000, £90,000 brand new, it's still a consumer purchase. And I've genuinely had situations where the company has just said, well, we're going to take our time to repair it, when the customer has said, no, I reject it because there's a serious problem with it. And invariably, not always, but invariably, they do just dig their heels in and they refuse to help. Unless and until you engage a lawyer and there's the real threat of litigation, and even then they might instruct lawyers to argue, I'll put it bluntly, argue the toss over what's wrong with the vehicle and whose fault it is. Now, what do we do about this situation here? Because many people will just say, well, that's wear and tear, isn't it? Well, not really, because there are certain things that wear and tear. So, for example, tires and all of the stuff that you might expect, different belts and moving mechanisms, these kind of things are probably wear and tear. But this was so far as I understand it from those more intelligent than me with regard to vehicles, tell me, it's the electronic box that controls the power steering of the vehicle has failed. They tell me that they've spoken to people and they do one a month or so of these things. So it's a reasonably regular thing. Now, a bit more about the story first, then I'll come back to what we do about this. So obviously I'm there. I've just come off an 11-hour flight, having been up for 24 hours or so because it was a late departure. And I arrived back at Heathrow and the vehicle obviously is kaput. There is no way that this can be driven home. So I speak to the RAC. Now, all singing and praises for the RAC here. I know that I've certainly heard stories of people not having a great experience with them, but that's not my experience. My experience was absolutely fantastic. I did try to call them, but it was much easier on the app. So the companies are pushing things down the app route these days. I would prefer to speak to somebody, but by the by, I put it through on the app. I put all the details in. I do think it was better because it allowed me to pinpoint the precise location. Then within moments, somebody called me and said, right, I've just confirmed where you are, confirm what the problem is. Have you done this? Have you done that? Yes. Obviously, you need somebody to come out. So then they arranged someone to come out. Within 20 minutes, Scott arrived. So huge shout out to Scott. Really nice guy, really helpful. He was kind enough to have already been watching my channel, so that's really nice to hear. He even offered to buy us water whilst we waited for the pickup truck because he couldn't fix the problem on site, obviously because it's a very specific problem with Land Rover and the mechanism, the steering, it's just not something you can fix at the side of the road. Nonetheless, he was out within 20 minutes. Fantastic service. Then the pickup truck was out within another about 30 minutes, I think, albeit it was late and we were tired. And as you know, I was quite ill at the time. But the pickup truck arrived. So at this point, I get the vehicle out of the car park to be picked up by this truck. Now, I am not exaggerating when it took all of my weight and strength to turn the steering wheel to get it in line, to get it out of the car park. In fact, my back hurts just thinking about that experience. But then he lifted it on, and within, I think, 2 to 3 days or whatever, they had it sent to my local garage. By which point, I then speak to Land Rover and say, this is really bad. This could have been a really serious collision had this failed in the middle of a high-speed road, or certainly a windy road. You just would not, I really don't think I'd have been able to keep hold of the vehicle and keep it straight. And certainly someone, I'm not that strong, but someone less strong than me certainly would not have been able to control the vehicle. Put it that way. It was just absolutely no way you could control this vehicle. Because I'm not a mechanic, but those tell me that the way these work now is different, because back in the day, back in the 90s, my first car had no power steering, but it was back in the original traditional style rack and pinion thing where it's much more mechanical than it is today. Today, it much more relies on the electronics and very small amount of hydraulics or whatever, all controlled by the electronics. But if it doesn't work, you are physically forcing the thing to move, which it's not really designed. Obviously, it's not designed to work like that. And I would think that if it fails, it should have some kind of manual mechanism to make it work. It doesn't, so far as I can see, because it was really, really difficult to move the steering wheel. And I would say that it would not be safe to drive that any more than a short distance to wherever it fails to get you to where you're going or whatever. Very short distance only. And if it was a long, windy road, it could have been catastrophic. Thankfully, it wasn't. Anyway, Land Rover said, no, it's out of warranty, it's out of this and whatever, so we would not look to cover the cost. So that obviously then lands you with a bill, which is in the region of about £4,000 to repair this thing. Now, aside from it being a really serious defect, it's a really expensive defect, and it's one that I would not expect, both as an individual, consumer, and as a lawyer, I would not expect to fail at this stage of the vehicle's life. Not a great advert for Land Rover. So where does that put us in the dispute process? Well, there is the Motor Ombudsman, which is a free service you can file your complaint with, and just be mindful that you will need evidence of what the problem is. Well, first of all, you'll need a deadlock letter from the dealer and the manufacturer to say that they are not going to help you. Then the Motor Ombudsman can look at it. But you will also need evidence. So you will need a written report, which I'm going to obtain from the garage as to what's wrong, what's failed, why it's failed, etc. And you'll need this evidence to supply to say this is what's gone wrong, and in their opinion, this should not go wrong at that stage of the vehicle's life. Now, full caveat and disclosure from my video, because I'm telling you a true story here, I've not had that report yet. They have promised me that they will do that report. They are also doing the repair. I've instructed them to do the repair because legally I'm under an obligation to mitigate my ongoing costs, and so I would otherwise potentially have to get a hire vehicle to replace this vehicle whilst they're repairing it. And so if I were waiting for Land Rover to do diagnostics and all of this sort of stuff, which, by the way, they said they'd charge me for, I would otherwise be at further costs by hiring that vehicle. So instead, I've just said to the garage, just get on with the repair. They're using genuine parts and they're only charging me for labour plus the parts to fit it. So it's going to be about £4,000 or just shy of £4,000. Now, I'm under a legal duty to mitigate those costs, so I've said to get on with that. They've promised to do this report for me to tell me what failed and why. Obviously, when they get it off, they can take a closer look, but they've already done the diagnostics by plugging in the machine. Now, when I provide that evidence to the Motor Ombudsman, they can then take a look and look reasonably, objectively, whether or not it's reasonable to expect this part to last longer than it did. If they find that it should last longer than that and it's unreasonable that it failed so soon, they might hold the manufacturer and or the dealer responsible for the cost of the repairs, or a proportion of the cost of those repairs. All that fails, that's not the end of the road, no pun intended, but there is a potential claim against both the manufacturer and the dealer for a latent defect. A latent defect is something that was there at the beginning, but could not be seen and was not reasonable for a consumer to be able to see was there at the beginning and only showed itself and reared its ugly head later on in life, such as this thing here. Now, It could well be argued that this is, and I think it would be argued, that this is a latent defect. In other words, they built this system for the power steering, including the electronics box and the module, whatever they call it, and it was somehow inherently defective in that it wasn't built properly and was liable to failure. That doesn't mean it was failed from the outset. It could mean that it worked from the outset, but it was not built to satisfactory quality and fit for purpose in that it should last longer. And that is how the report, together with a reasonable objective analysis of this set of facts, would enable a court to potentially decide that this was a latent defect and therefore a breach of contract. Now, again, as I've discussed in recent videos, under the Consumer Rights Act, with regard to other products, it seems that lots of things are going wrong these days, and I find it utterly frustrating when companies all routinely just wash their hands of it. And I do these videos to help you to know what you can argue with them about. And so obviously in this case here, fit for purpose, satisfactory quality, etc., all the arguments and all the clauses under the Consumer Rights Act that are implied into the contract, that could be a breach of contract on the basis that it's a latent defect, that it was always defective, and now it's presented itself and effectively caused you loss. Now, the upshot of this is that it would only be, I say only, but only about £4,000 repair, which means it is not more than £10,000, which means it's likely to be allocated to the small claims track, which means, unless you disobey any court orders or you fail to file documents or evidence or whatever, then you would only be liable for the issue fee and the hearing fee, and you do get those back if you win the claim. What they can't do is claim costs against you on the small claims track, because the idea is it's to limit your risk of bringing these kind of claims that are of these kind of value. Now, I've had companies routinely threaten my clients with costs, even though it's on the small claims track. And I think that's wrong, because to be honest, I think it goes against their integrity and their honesty to say, we will get these costs from you. In the way that it's worded is at least the way it's inferred. It may be strictly okay in the way that some of them word it, but I think it's wrong nonetheless, because ordinarily they will not be at risk to those costs on the small claims track. But this is yet another situation where I've butted heads with car companies. This time it's personal. Not a great advert for Land Rover, I have to say. I will never be buying one of these again, because for something this serious to fail, I suppose it could fail on lots of vehicles, but bit of Googling later, and it seems that this is a reasonably common occurrence. And other people that I've spoken to have also said that this is a reasonably common occurrence. So that's what the research suggests on a cursory reading. So let me know in the comments if you've had similar kind of problems before, and we can talk about how you deal with those. But this is not the best advert. But I'll let you know what happens. I'll keep you informed. I think it'll be really useful to let you know what happens, how I deal with it. I might even show you draft letters and all that sort of stuff, because I have very little risk in just filing the claim for this, because I won't be at risk to costs, because it'll be allocated to the small claims track. It'll just be the issue fee, the hearing fee, and they may well settle it along the way. We will see, but I will keep you updated. Let me know what you think. Please do subscribe to the channel. That really does help more than you know. And as always, thank you for watching.